Hey guys, so this is the second video in the tutorial series on how to use Zymbolic. So in the first video, we looked into the general layout of Zymbolic, and we also looked into some basic commands that you can use to format documents while working with Zymbolic. And while that stuff is important, the real reason why Zymbolic is so powerful is because it allows you to easily, intuitively, and quickly create equations, much more so than something like LaTeX or really any of the other tools on the market. I mean, in my personal experience, I found that working with Zymbolic is like 10 times better than anything else I've ever tried before. And I even had this like crazy custom LaTeX snippet type setup that allowed me to create really any equation I want very easily in LaTeX. And yeah, again, based on my experience, once I use Zymbolic, it's like impossible to go back to using any other tool just because Zymbolic is just like so much better. So go ahead and open up Zymbolic. The link is in the description below, and let's just dive right into it. Okay, so as you can see, I have a document open in Zymbolic called tutorial 2. And so to enter into math mode, I'm just gonna go ahead and press Shift Enter, and now we're in math mode. Okay, so the most important aspect of equations are symbols. And so the first thing you're probably wondering is how to create different symbols in Zymbolic. So basically all the keys that you can type in just on your keyboard are treated as symbols. So I can just type out A plus B is equal to C, or B equal to 2 or S, or anything I want. And then this just typesets what I've typed into a well-typed set equation. And again, so this works with stuff like letters, numbers, and then plus, minus, equal signs, stuff like that. Okay, so that's great, but as you know, frequently you'll use things that are much more complicated than just letters and numbers. So you might be wondering how to create more complicated symbols. So let's say, for example, that you want to create a Greek letter. How do you do that? Well, it turns out it's actually super simple to use Greek letters in Zymbolic. Literally, all you have to do to create a Greek letter is just type out the name of the Greek letter. So for example, if I want to create a beta, all I have to do is just type out B-E-T-A, and bada bing, bada boom, we have a beta. Wonderful. If I want to type a zeta, all I have to do is type Z-E-T-A, and that immediately gets parsed as a zeta, which is fantastic. Okay, so now we have letters, numbers, plus, equals, and now we have Greek letters. But as you know, again, there are way more math symbols than just Greek letters and letters. So how do you access those? Well, the thing to note here is that Zymbolic actually uses LaTeX under the hood. And so any symbol that you can create in LaTeX, you can actually use in Zymbolic. So let's say, for example, that I want to create a greater than or equal to sign. The way that I would do that in LaTeX is to create a symbol that kind of looks like \GE. This is the symbol that is parsed into a greater than or equal to sign when you're using LaTeX. And so analogously, when you're using Zymbolic, all you have to do is type out GE, the function name of that particular thing, and it immediately gets translated into the corresponding symbol in Zymbolic, which is great. And likewise, if I wanted to create a less than or equal to sign, I can create a less than or equal to sign, exactly like that. If I wanted to create a similar relation, all I have to do is type out similar. And even for more esoteric things, like Aleph, I can type A-L-E-P-H, and that immediately creates an Aleph. Wonderful. And so just using this method, you can basically create literally any symbol that you would want in Zymbolic. Okay, so the method that I just showed you works almost all the time, but there is one slight edge case that I need to address where this particular method won't work. So let's say, for example, that I want to create diagonal dots. The way that I'd create diagonal dots, and the reason I would do this is because I might be in a matrix and I want to indicate that the matrix is extended. The way that you would create diagonal dots in LaTeX is with the symbol DDOTS. Okay, so that's how you create diagonal dots in LaTeX. But if I try to do that in Zymbolic, here's what happens. I type DDOTS. Okay, this isn't exactly what I want to see. And the reason why this is happening is because DD, just typing DD, is actually a shortcut for creating a text D in Zymbolic. And the reason for this is that it just makes it much easier to quickly create derivatives while using Zymbolic. But in this particular case, I don't want a special D. I want to create diagonal dots. And so how do I do that? Well, the way you do that is actually type out the symbol in Zymbolic the exact same way that you would type it out in LaTeX. So if I type out \DDOTS, Zymbolic, when Zymbolic sees a backslash like this, it doesn't automatically parse the text that you wrote until you press enter. And once you press enter, there, now we have the diagonal dots that we want. And note that this works for any symbol that you want. So for example, I could use this method to create a zeta. I could type \ZETA. It's not going to create the zeta immediately. It's only going to create the zeta once I press enter. And then that parses that particular sequence as a zeta. Okay, so as I indicated before, you'll probably almost never need to use this, but it's just good to know in those slight edge cases where you find that the regular method for creating symbols just doesn't work. Okay, fantastic. So now that we have symbols, probably the next thing that you're wondering about is how you create little modifiers on symbols. So for example, if I wanted to create a vector, I don't just need the symbol, but I also need the little vector sign on top of the symbol also. Okay, so the way that you would do this in LaTeX is with a special function called vec, and then after the vec would come the symbol that is going to be vectorized. And so that's how you do it in LaTeX. The way that you do it in Zymbolic is actually pretty similar. You type out the symbol that you want, and then you use something called a dot modifier. And with a dot modifier, you press dot, and then you type out the particular function that you want to use to modify the symbol. So in this case, as you might expect, all we have to do is type out VEC, and that automatically adds a little vector sign on top of the symbol that we wanted to add the vector sign on top of. And I can use dot modifiers to basically toggle that vector on or off. And then I can also stack different functions. So for example, if I wanted this to include both a vector and a hat, I could type dot hat. And now we immediately have a symbol that has both a vector and a hat on top of it. And you probably wouldn't want this particular sequence. But if, for example, you wanted a vec and then 2 dots on top of it, you could type DDOT. And now you have a vector with a second order temporal derivative. And so wonderful. Okay, so that's how you can add basically any modifier. And again, just to stress, this works with any single variable function that you could use in LaTeX. It works in Zymbolic just as easily. So for example, another example of this would be like something like tilde a. If you wanted to create an a with a tilde on top of it, this is how you would do it in LaTeX. And there's a corresponding dot modifier in Zymbolic. So I could just type out a dot tilde, and that immediately adds a little tilde on top of the a. Wonderful. Okay, so now you know how to very easily and quickly create symbols and modifiers. But as you know, equations are typically more complicated than just a string of symbols. You'll typically want things like functions. So for example, if you wanted to create a square root with things under it, how would you do that in Zymbolic? That's a great question. So just to kind of go along with the method I've been using so far, the way that you would create such a thing in LaTeX would be to type \sqrt, and then after that would come over, after the square root would come whatever you want to be included in that square root. So that's how you do it in LaTeX, and it's actually very similar to create functions in Zymbolic as it is to create symbols. Literally all you have to do is type sqrt. This automatically creates a square root, and also creates a little sub-environment inside of the square root that allows you to basically add anything you want inside of the square root. So I can just type literally anything I want, it's included inside there. And if I want to move outside of that little environment, I can just go ahead and press enter or tab, and now I'm outside of that environment. And likewise, I can also use the arrow keys to just move inside and outside of that particular environment. And just to really hit this home, let me give you another example. Something that I use as a physics student, as a quantum mechanics student, is bracket notation. And so the way that I would create a ket with something inside of it is ket, and then the symbol. And the way that I would do this in Zymbolic, I would just literally type out the function name, ket, and then go ahead and type whatever symbols I want to include inside of that. And once I want to get outside of that little ket environment, I can go ahead and just press enter, and that takes me outside of the ket environment. And then one more thing that I should note is, just like before with how you can use backslashes to ensure you get definitely the right symbol that you want, you can also do the same thing with Zymbolic and functions. So for example, something that I might want, again, as a physics student, is to use this bracket function, which creates both a bra and a ket that I can put things inside of. Now, if I try to do that in Zymbolic, I just type out bra. This immediately gets parsed as a bra, and if I just type ket, this creates something crazy, something that I don't want at all. But if I instead type out \braket and then press enter, now this is the right function that I want. So again, just using that backslash to create the analogous symbol in Zymbolic as you would in LaTeX allows you to ensure that you definitely get the right function that you want. And again, I want to stress that you hardly ever need this, but there are some kind of edge cases where you will want to ensure that you're getting the absolute right function. Okay, fantastic. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is wrapping functions. So let's say, for example, that I have the a plus b here, but after I've written those things, I realize that I actually want to include those things inside of a square root. So how do I do that? I don't want to rewrite everything that I just wrote. I just want to somehow get a square root around that. So the way that I do that is to use @ and then sqrt. And this actually wraps whatever comes before it in the square root, and I can use the left and right arrow key in order to control what elements are actually included inside of the square root sign. And so this basically makes it super easy for me to modify or edit things by wrapping functions around previous symbols. And again, I can do the same thing. Let's say I have something like omega plus zeta, and I want to wrap this inside of a ket, I can just go ahead and type @ket, and this wraps all of the preceding things inside of the ket. And once again, I can just use the left and right arrow key to control what is actually inside of that ket. All right, fantastic. So after watching this video, you now know how to create any symbol you would ever want in Zymbolic, and you also know how to create modifiers on top of those symbols, and you also know how to use functions. Fantastic. Okay, so this will give you the ability to write a huge range of equations, but there are a couple extra things that you will want to know about, stuff like superscripts, subscripts, and fractions. And we're gonna cover a lot of those in the next video. So stay tuned, and I will see you there.